Since 1915, one day in the year has involved the whole of Australia in solemn ceremonies of remembrance, gratitude and national pride. That day is Anzac Day. While many people might see this as just another holiday, the rest of our nation pauses to commemorate the bravery and sacrifice of members of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and of all those who served their country, a supreme test of quality, the result of which has heartened or disheartened those who have come afterwards. For Australia as a nation, the first supreme test began in the early hours of Sunday the 25th of April 1915, on the Gallipoli Peninsula in the eastern Mediterranean. Today I have the honour of chatting with Major General Paul Simon, Deputy Chief of the Australian Army, a recipient of the Sword of Honour, and a graduate of the Australian Command and Staff College and the Centre for Defence and Strategic Studies. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree, a Master of Defence Studies from the University of New South Wales and a Master of Arts from Deakin University. He was named a member of the Order of Australia in the 2000 Queen's Birthday Honours List, and further recognised for his operational service in the Middle East, with an award of Officer of the Order of Australia in the 2007 Australia Day Honours List. And today we'll be talking about the significance of Anzac Day. Welcome, Major General Simon.
Hello, Victoria.
May I please call you Paul?
Please do.
What I'd like to begin with, if I may, today, is the significance of Anzac Day. Now, while doing a little bit of research on the Australian War Memorial website, one of the things that I discovered, and was quite astounded by, I might add, was that so many of our men who volunteered for this task did so because they thought it would be an adventure and a way to see the world. Of course, what they didn't take into consideration, nor could they have possibly imagined, were the conditions that they would face when they got overseas. It really was an eye-opener for them, wasn't it?
Well, that's exactly right, and how to start to talk about Anzac Day, because it's such a signature date in our us as a nation. It has its military roots, and it's at its core, it's, I guess, a day of reflection about the role that the military, have played in the nation and its development, and us as a nation. But it's bigger than just the military. It's so much about, if as I see it, about our emergence and growth as a matured nation state in its own right. I think, as you've rightly said, for when you turn your mind back to 1915, how different, the young men and women were of those days to the young men and women that we're sending to Afghanistan and Iraq and East Timor and the Solomons today. They were volunteers. I think they were excited by the idea and prospect of going to the other side of the world and fighting for the empire.
And I guess back then they would have had absolutely no idea what they were getting into. With so much turmoil on the planet nowadays, of course, all of our troops know exactly what to expect.
Well, that's right. And I mean, it's amazing to think that they embarked on the ships with no idea. We, right now, we spend 6 months in advance of our troops going, not only preparing them individually and collectively, but we certify them ready for operations. We've built, replica villages in our training ranges so that our soldiers, before they go, get an opportunity to work in, replica environments to where they're going to find themselves, either in the Pacific Islands or over in the Middle East. We have people who role play, the local community, whether it's the local imam or whoever. How different that is to 1915. It's an extraordinary difference. But I guess underpinning it all is it talks about what we are as a nation. We're not a military-oriented nation. We never have been, and we never want to be. And I never see us being it. But we are proud of the fact. We are proud of the performance of our diggers. We as a nation have always looked after them and looked after their families, and I think that's as true, in 2009 as it was in in 1915, which comes to the point of, the way we feed them and look after them, which is probably a good segue for you, Victoria.
Well, thanks for that. Yes, well, Anzac biscuits aside, which of course have a story all of their own, our troops' diet left really quite a lot to be desired, didn't it? I mean, their rations were basically consisted rather, of bully beef, some apricot jam, and some small portions of nuts and things that the Turks used to throw over the fences to them. They really had no access to fresh vegetables. There was maybe the odd bit of canned food. It was really no wonder that the Anzac biscuits became such a popular item for them, really.
Well, it was only when I met you for the first time last year that I guess you opened my eyes to a couple of things. One is the simplicity of what, for example, became the Anzac biscuit, but also the nutritional, what we now know. I don't know whether they knew in those days, but the nutritional qualities that were embedded in such a simple biscuit. I mean, that was news to me, and I guess speaks to the ingenuity of someone. Whoever came up with the idea.
Well, it was the wives and the mothers and the girlfriends of the Australian soldiers that were concerned for that nutritional value of the food being supplied to their men. And
Yes.
they saw it as a problem, and they wanted to provide some sort of food that they could ship that would last the distance. And of course, the time it took to get from here to there, which was quite a long time using the Merchant Navy. And that's when they came up with the biscuit, which was originally a Scottish recipe, and it contained rolled oats. So nutritionally, it was actually very, very good. It didn't have any eggs in it. And the reason for that, of course, as you'll remember from the segment, was that the farmers who produced the eggs were in fact all over there fighting. So that's why they didn't have any eggs. Plus, of course, eggs do deteriorate, so it made it last a lot longer by not having that. But given the conditions that they endured over there in those trenches, I can imagine how really welcome they were.
Absolutely. I mean, let me assure your listeners, it's not like that in 2009. I mean,
Well, I'd imagine they've got little eskies now and all the other little mod cons.
Interestingly, I was over in the Middle East a few years ago as the national commander. Now, when I was in Baghdad and where I was eating in one of the big American canteens, they actually had a calorie count against all of the foods that they
Seriously?
that they were feeding the soldiers. Now, actually, one of the senior generals directed them to take that away because a lot of the American soldiers really just wanted to eat, the fried chips and the big hamburgers and all of that, and they were getting some of them were getting a bit upset by the fact that this was. They weren't really eating what they should be eating, and rather than save the embarrassment, it was easy just to take away the signs. Would you believe, actually, you may not know this, the general in Iraq at the time had a nutritionist advisor, and I'd never heard of that. In all my reading of history, I'd never read of that, and I don't know whether they still do, but certainly a few years ago, he had this nutritional advisor who recommended that they put this, calorie count against the food, but the general ended up overruling it in the end because there was a bit of a morale issue going on with the big American lads who really just wanted to eat the fat food.
Which they do so well.
Yes. You said that, not me.
No, look, I wasn't being derogatory there. But, nowadays, of course, we do take into consideration the nutrition. We do prepare our boys and girls, of course, nowadays, for anything that they're going to come up against. And the fact that you do the boot camps and the simulations and everything really puts them in a good position. But back then, they were so incredibly naive. I mean, they had no idea what they were going into. They had no idea of what to expect. And they didn't even dress appropriately. I mean, some of these guys, when they went from the warmer climate into the cooler climate, when they were still out there, literally froze to death at their posts. They had absolutely no idea what to expect.
Yeah, well, that's right. And of course, there was a very big expectation that the British would provide all of that as well, and they had their own pressure. I mean, they were increasing in size rapidly as well. So, here we were, a very small nation, contributed an incredible percentage of our population away on operations, but we didn't have the indigenous capacity or capability to be able to fully, provide the supplies and the clothing and all of that. We were tremendously reliant on the British for that. So, I'm sure not only did they embark not knowing exactly what they were doing, I can only imagine that there was a whole lot of the senior leaders on those ships genuinely scratching their heads, worrying about whether, in fact, they would have enough equipment, whether they'd have the right equipment, whether, all those sorts of issues. I mean, it's obviously so much easier nowadays where, the world is so small and we can communicate so easily to get these things right. But boy, in those days it was really difficult.
Well, I would have to agree with you there. Paul, I just want to thank you for your time today and for giving us a little bit more of an insight into what our diggers went through and why we actually celebrate Anzac Day and what it's all about. I hope you have a fantastic Anzac Day and look forward to talking to you again soon.
My pleasure, Victoria, anytime.